Today I am joined with, do you go by doctor or pastor?
Doctor, pastor, either one works.
You worked hard for doctors. I'm going to call you doctor.
Okay.
Dr. Glenn Russell. He is, let's have you introduce yourself. How would you describe yourself?
Wow. Simple things. Missionary's kid, born in Cairo, Egypt, grew up in the country of Lebanon until I was 18, came to the States, pastored, got married, have 2 adult children now and some grandchildren, and served as a teacher and a pastor, and mainly a sinner forgiven by God's grace.
That's so good.
That's the real thing.
That's really good. So he taught me a class about Love 101. I guess it's a religion class. Where did you get your experience from in relationships, I guess?
Wow. Well, first thing I'd say is it's great to be here on Humble Conversations, because I think really humble is how I come to this, because, maybe sometimes we do things because we recognize our own need, And so when we started this class, Love 101, it was like, I needed this when I was in college, but it wasn't offered. And just to know how to get along with people, to have positive relationships is such a challenge. And we have so many poor models out there. Then what can we find in Scripture? What can we find in psychology? And so that's kind of how it all started. I said, someday I want to teach a class called Love 101, because we're all beginners. We're all learning.
And you did it.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah, I agree. I think this is exactly why I started this podcast too, because I feel like there isn't enough information on, all this stuff, and you get the wrong answers. And so this is good. So, as you guys know, if you have paid attention to anything, it's almost Valentine's Day, which is, the month and the time of love. And so there's a lot of questions that I definitely have, and I know a lot of other people are struggling with too, with the whole concept of relationships and, just keeping it healthy. You've been married for 50 years, if I remember.
We just had our 50th anniversary.
50th anniversary. What would you say is your biggest piece of advice for maintaining that?
Find a wife who has pity on you.
Pity?
I think it's always good to marry up. It's always good to marry someone who challenges you, who raises you, and so forth. And just jokingly, I said to my fiancée at the time, you can marry me for love or for pity, whichever way. I just need you to help me be a better person. So wow. I think I don't mean that, too seriously, because we both bring things to the relationship.
I never would have thought the answer to that question would have been pity.
I don't mean that in the wrong way.
Yeah.
But it was just a way of trying to say, I recognize her strengths. Some people want like a weaker person, or they want an audience, or they want a fan club. But I think to find someone who's better, somebody once said, marry the person who's going to get you to heaven. Well, that isn't quite right, because only God can do that. But maybe we could say, marry the person who will keep you out of hell, who will keep you from going the wrong way. And that was kind of a surprise to me, because here I was a student studying theology, studying to be a pastor, and I recognized she had a more consistent time with God each day. She was more faithful in actually living it than I was, even though I was studying it. And that, as a sophomore in college, that really impressed me.
That's really good. Why would you say that relationships as a whole are important?
We're made in the image of God, and God is relational. And even before there was any human being created, any angels created, God was love. And it's really cool to think how the Father could love the Son and the Holy Spirit, and they could have other focused love. And so God is relational. He always wants relationships. And if we're made in His image, then relationships are important. They're vital to us. During the Second World War in England, there was a hospital that was having better infant mortality rates than other hospitals. Many of the fathers had been drafted after the wife got pregnant, and they were gone off to war, and the mothers and the bombs are dropping, and it was hard times, and many babies were dying in the hospital. But in this one hospital, more of them were living. And they couldn't figure out why. And they started doing some research and discovered that there was a little lady who was actually one of the janitors at the hospital. And each day she'd go by, and she would hold and hug and sing to the infants there who had just been born and was helping him survive, because we have to have relationships. We have to have love.
Why do you think that so many relationships nowadays, they seem to fail?
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? In fact, when I meet friends that I went to school with, when I meet people I've known and haven't seen for a while, you know how it is. You almost hesitate to say, so how are things going, you know? I don't dare say, are you still married? How's so-and-so? Because I have to just kind of say, well, how's your family? And just kind of put it out there in some vague way, because you never know. So there are a lot of broken hearts and broken relationships. I think it's partly because of this thing called sin and selfishness. And we see so many examples of that. It's hard times to connect with people in a deep way. It's not easy.
Very true. And I feel like social media doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah. It maybe makes it easier to get started meeting someone.
Right.
But once we're into it, yeah, I don't think social media is much good for anything of depth. You know, you can put a quick quote or a statement or response on something, but if you want to go much deeper, you need some time.
Yeah.
It takes time.
Very true. I even think that social media damages it. It's not even, because a lot of the time, if you feel like you and your in your relationships, they're going great and they're, you know, so healthy, but then social media can like plant a seed of like negativity, and it just changes everything. So I feel like it's even damaging in a way.
I think you're right. It certainly can be. It can be artificial. We can kind of groom our profile so we always give the best impression. And, you know, part of being with someone is realizing that, you know, sometimes after a couple's been married for a while, they're going to wake up and one of them has morning breath and the other one's hair is all messed up. And, you know, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Because it's not the perfect profile.
Very true. With, you know, social media and with, you know, movies now, movies are super graphic in terms of like being graphic. And there's just, it's so hard now with like just completely never watch a movie again and delete all social medias. How would you say you can get over it, I guess?
What you've said is really true, because we do want to guard our hearts and minds, you know, because the only way anything can bring us down is what comes in through our senses. What we hear, what we taste, what we see, what we touch. And so we need to guard those gateways to our brains, you know. Fortunately, there are some resources. I think if someone's going to watch a movie, it's pretty good to kind of look at some reviews, find out. And there's several Christian websites that review movies from a Christian perspective, for example, if you want to pay attention to your values and say, okay, how much, you know, porn, how much swearing, how much violence, etc. There's movies I've started to watch, and then you just say, oh, this isn't worth it, you know.
Yeah.
It's too violent, it's too graphic, and it has that great thing called off switch or change channels or stop the video, you know, stop the streaming. We've got to be in charge.
What if, I don't know, there's some people that it's just really hard to turn it off.
And I think that's where we need to know ourselves. We should know our points of weakness, you know. If a person knows there's certain things that are going to bring him down, stay away from it. I know a gentleman who's happily married, but previously he had a pretty strong addiction with porn, and he's tried to stay clean now. When he travels, he knows that if he gets into a hotel room and there's everything on the TV or on the cable, it's going to bring him down. He's going to be tempted. So he asks them at the hotel when he checks in, can you just disconnect it? You know, I don't want that in the room because I know it may, you know, you can't go through life with blinders on completely, but we can be careful, you know. There's no point in me standing in front of a temptation that I know is attractive and saying, oh, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want, well, then we need to move away from it, you know. And most of us have a sense, an instinct. You go to a party, you get a sense, this isn't the best place to be. Or you start watching something, I don't like where this is going. We should trust that part of our instincts that are saying, this isn't so good.
Yeah, instead of saying, oh, I can handle it.
Yeah. it might get better and so forth, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things that can be quite shocking is sometimes just to take a piece of paper if you're going to watch something and put a few categories down, you know, obscenities, profanities, taking God's name in vain, explicit, crude jokes, etc., etc. Just start checking off when those happen. Many times it's amazing at the end to say, wow, that's really what I consumed. You know, it's kind of like going to a dumpster looking for food, going through all the garbage.
And you don't even notice it most
Yeah,
of the time. Yeah.
just kind of goes by.
A lot of people feel like maybe it's not worth stopping.
It's not worth the sacrifice or the effort.
Yeah.
It's not going to make that much
Like they
difference.
don't think it's that bad.
Yeah. You know, we have a lot of brain research that can help us these days. And we know now that every memory is implanted in our brains, in our memories. Person gets older, they start losing their memory, but they haven't lost the memory, it's just the access to it. You know, they've forgotten where the file is located. But when they've done brain surgery, they've been able to actually put a probe on somebody's brain and to touch a certain part of your brain, for example, and you might start talking about your 4th birthday, where it was, who was there, what color the cake was, etc. It's all there. And if we keep implanting our brains with negative, destructive things, it's going to come out. For example, with the issue of pornography, how does that start impacting a marriage, for example, or a long-term relationship? What does it feel like? I can't speak for women, but what does it feel like to have a situation where a woman walks in, you know, maybe they've been married for 10, 15 years and they've had a baby or two, she's got some stretch marks, she's not, you know, 19 and 98 pounds or something like that. You know, life has had taken its toll on both of them. And she sees her husband there watching some porn. What does that make? How does that make her feel? You know, it's fake reality, first of all, and she's being compared. So then sexuality becomes a comparison, a performance compared to the other performance or the other person or what I watched on screen. So I think it really twists something that should be a shared gift into something that becomes a performance. How do I rate compared to others? And who wants that?
Yeah. If someone is struggling and they see how, you know, bad it is and they want to stop, but it's really hard to, because there's temptations everywhere, like especially nowadays, it's literally everywhere and it's so normalized. If you were dating someone that's struggling with it, how would you support them in a way of not like enabling them or excusing it?
I think you have to be sure what your standards are. And in a relationship, when it comes time for commitment, for marriage, or for living together, you need to know in your head I don't want to say your minimum, but you know, what's your standard? What do you expect? Do you want a spouse, a partner who's addicted to sex, someone who's impure in their thoughts, someone who every time they say I'm late coming home from work, you wonder, every time somebody goes by, are they looking at them lustfully? Are they are they noticing others? Are they fantasizing? You know, that's not a healthy relationship. That's not the comfort and the safe place they want to be. And so you have to decide for yourself, what are you looking for? What do you want to have? And then that determines what I want to be. If I want someone who's pure, someone who's committed, then I need to become that myself. Because we spend a lot of time looking for the right person instead of being the right person.
That's a big quote.
Yeah.
There's so many things that you just said that I feel like I could take this conversation in so many different ways. Because you said standards. When it comes to standards that you want to set, how would you decide if the standard is like something that you're willing to compromise for, or if it's something that you should, you know, if I don't have this, then we're done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's interesting what we teach children and then how we talk about things as adults. Because with small children, especially in our perverted world, you have to teach a child, look, certain parts of your body are private. They should never be touched by anyone who's outside, you know, mom, dad, if they have to, bathing or something, your doctor, no one else touches you in those private places. But then when people become adults, it's like, well, what's wrong? And you know what I mean? We have forgotten that certain things are private for a reason, you know, for protection, for self-care, and so forth. So I've done weddings where people have never even kissed until they got married. And everybody thinks, oh, you know, they're going to have a warped relationship, you know, you need to try some things beforehand to see if you're compatible and so forth. I've never had any of those several marriages where they never even kissed come back and say, oh, we found out we're not compatible.
Yeah.
In fact, usually the first kiss at the wedding tends to linger. You know what I mean? And you get a clear sense that they're going to be okay. Now, I'm not saying you have to go to that place, but certainly to have some sense of this is what we want. Because if you can't trust the person before commitment, how are you going to trust them afterwards? You know.
Yeah.
So it's mutual. It's got to be talked through together. But if a person hasn't come to terms with their own sense of purity and what I need to have a pure heart, pure mind, so that I'm looking at people as people and not as sex objects, not as potential fantasy partners or real life partners. If a person hasn't gone to that place, do you want to get into the most intimate relationship? You know, I mean, God created male and female. Sexuality is a part of who we are. But it's interesting, that's the closest we come, you know, through sexuality, through sexual behavior, a child is born. That's the closest we come to creating out of nothing. I mean, we create song, we create other things, but creating out of nothing like God does, the closest we come is an egg and a sperm. I mean, that's pretty tiny.
Yeah.
But look how that's all gotten corrupted. The point of our highest creativity has become corrupted. You know, if we could think about the long term, I think that's probably the biggest thing. Ask yourself the question, what do I want long term? What habits, what relationship do I want a year, 5 years, 10 years from now? You know, yesterday we went to visit some friends who are going through a really tough time. They've been married about as long as we have, but they've had some real hardships. She's slipping into dementia. He's got severe cancer and is in hospice. But you know, they made decisions about what they wanted to be as a couple and who they wanted to be. And so 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, they can look back and say, you know, we don't have a lot of regrets because we determined the values that we would have. Instead of a temporary, what works right now because I have these desires or whatever, you know. And, you know, we can shape our desires a lot.
Yeah.
I remember, this sounds strange, but I grew up overseas. The first time I had pizza, I thought this is the weirdest stuff, you know? Now I enjoy pizza. We have something we call haystacks, right?
Yeah.
First time I ever had them, I thought, this is the strangest. Okay, I get beans and rice and chips and salad, but layers all on top of each other?
Yeah.
But we can adjust our likes, we can adjust our tastes.
That's good.
What we feed is what grows. Our desires, our thoughts, whatever we feed is what grows, you know. They say in Alaska there's a road that is pretty rough, and they say choose your rut because you'll be in it for the next 40 miles.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way our brains work. Our neurons connect in familiar pathways. And if we keep making those pathways, that's going to be where we're most likely to go, you know. Which goes right back to, well, why expose ourselves?
Yeah.
You know, you're building a pathway. It's kind of, you know, for a lot of us, in terms of sexuality, we kind of are like sitting in a car with a foot on the brake, and then we're pressing on the gas, and the engine's revving.
Yeah.
We're not going anywhere. It's hard on the engine, and you know, it can lead to all kinds of problems. So it's better to figure out, okay, am I doing the brake or am I doing the gas here?
About long-term relationships, when, because when you date someone for so long or married or whatever, you grow as different people, right? And so what do you do if one person, let's say, is maybe growing in a different direction or growing faster than the other person? How do you know when to wait, when to not?
That's what you said is really true. When I work with couples pre-marriage, I tell them you're not going to be married to the same person in 5 or 10 years because that person will change. So you change together. How do you do that? Um, Investing in time together, making memories together, uh, appreciating the growth areas. If someone is going to grad school and the other person hasn't finished high school, if they're not careful, they can grow apart.
Yeah.
you know so how do you keep that from happening? Well, you take an interest in the area. You share some things. My wife is a reading specialist. There were times when I would go to her school and just volunteer for an hour or something like that, just to get a sense of what's her life like. What are the challenges she's facing, the joys that she's experiencing. We have to make some investments.
Yeah.
Together. Otherwise, you can grow apart very easily. On that point, I had a couple that I saw after they had been married 25, 30 years. And the wife said, we got a divorce, and I was sad to hear the news. But she had moved on in her life and so forth. She says, well, we were never really compatible in the first place. I thought, So I went back and I looked up the compatibility inventory that they had done. There's some really good resources for couples, which I could mention later. But I looked at, they were very compatible at the time when they were engaged. So I followed up by talking with her later and said, so, you had me wondering when you said you were never compatible in the first place. Was it really that way at the beginning, or did things change? And she says, oh, yeah, it was pretty good when we started, but then he started working away from home and taking long business trips, and I got involved in other things, and we just grew apart. So love, I think, is a verb, not just a noun. We love as a noun, but it's loving, it's the verb part, the actions that we need to focus and invest on. Because you can't just put something here and say, okay, this is wonderful love. Everything living is either growing or dying. So either we're helping our love grow, or it's dying. Because it doesn't. In nature, things don't stay dormant for long. They might for a little while, but not for long. Either growing or dying.
So basically, you're saying to keep it growing is to be intentional about it, to keep, learning about the other person, and that's good.
Taking an interest in their interests and finding some shared interest. You better have some things you enjoy doing together, some recreation, some sports, some activities, etc. My wife and I really enjoy biking, and we go camping together. I mean, there's things that you need to do together. There's some things I enjoy she doesn't. There's some things she enjoys that I don't. But we got to find other things that we can share. So you're not just two people in the same house. You're sharing experiences.
When it comes to defining love and what it is and how to make it grow, how it's so easy for lust to be disguised as love. How would you differentiate the two or know which one's which?
And early on in a relationship, I think the advice would be different than later on. If that makes any sense. Let me explain. I think early on, we need to pay attention to people's behaviors and not just their words. Because he may say all kind of sweet nothings, but if he acts differently, pay attention to how are they treating you? How is that person showing that they care? What kind of character are they? Are they dependable? Are they someone who is authentic? Are they someone who is trustworthy? Do you really feel you can trust them, and so forth? Not just by what they say, but how they're acting. If they say, hey, let's meet, do they show up? Do they show that you're a priority to them? I think early on we need to, somebody says we should go into marriage, go into a relationship with eyes wide open, and then after we're committed, close one of them.
Why one?
Well, you don't want to become blind to things. But we do need to say, okay, I've made a commitment. Now, how do I make this work?
So you said that that's in the beginning of the relationship?
Yeah, I think so.
What about at the...
As it gets deeper, then I think things start coming in, like what values do we share? Do we share purposes in life? You know, I think it's really important for a couple to have something they're both committed to bigger than the two of them.
When it comes to knowing if this is the right person that you should be marrying or not, what do you think are some questions we should ask or topics we should talk about before even thinking about marriage?
Yeah. You know, in relationships, there's what I sometimes think of as like gauged vulnerability. You know, some people kind of trust too much too soon, and they spill out all kinds of things of private nature, and then if that relationship doesn't last, it's gossip and garbage to be spread around and all the rest. So I think trust has to be kind of earned. And you share little by little as it grows deeper and deeper. You know, knowing if this is the right one, that's the big question. You know, the short answer I would say is when you get to the point where you feel like this is too good to lose, this relationship, and I can't imagine my life being very joyful without this person. You know, I'm not saying if you break up with me, I'll die kind of thing, but saying this brings me so much joy, gives me purpose and meaning. I'm a better person because of this relationship. So yeah, I could cope with a loss, but it would be less. And I want a full life. I want a joyful life. So there's that part, you know, and that takes a while. I mean, I was a slow learner. I mean, we dated for about 4 years, which is a long time. Now, for a year of that, I was a student missionary, so that kind of slowed things down. But it was when, you know, I knew that I couldn't get married before I got done with college and had bills to pay and, you know, so on and so forth. So, but then as it came up to graduation, she said, well, I think I'm going to be taking a job across the country. And all of a sudden I started scrambling, saying, well, wait a second, you know, I can't imagine that happening. And I don't want to go through my life without your friendship, your influence, your joy, your blessing, you know. And that's, you may feel at the beginning some infatuation feelings of, oh, this is so awesome, I can't, but give it time. I think a couple needs to go a year at least in their dating before they can really start sensing, you know. And then you have to ask questions. Are we headed the same direction in life? Do we share the same faith? And by that I mean, are we practicing the faith? Whatever level of whatever faith we have, is it something we're living out? You know, if one person says, for example, okay, you know, I believe in going to church, and the other one's like, yeah, but I want to be a missionary. That's a big difference, you know. So you need to find out what's shared in your values, your faith, the direction of your life, which is why basically it's important just to decide who's, quotes, off limits, you know. And I would say this, a basic principle: don't date someone who you know you wouldn't marry, because our emotions can get caught up in it. So if you say, well, I want a godly man as my husband, don't date an ungodly one. You know, I want someone who loves children. If I want a family, I want someone who loves children. Don't go with someone who doesn't want to have any kids, who doesn't want to be around them. There's always going to be some bumps. There's always going to be something that doesn't quite fit together, but at least on the big things, you know.
What if their minds change?
And they might. And that's where you have to just keep together, keep spending time, be in touch. I grew up as the youngest kid, so I was never used to having children around. But, you know, it's become a joy of my life. So I think that it's really interesting to be sure that we grow, we understand how we're changing. And sometimes it happens like that when a baby's born and someone just
Yeah.
It's amazing how maternal or paternal someone can become, you know. But on the other hand, I sure wouldn't say, well, have kids so you come closer together. No, no, no.
Right.
They're a lot of work, you
Right,
know.
right, right.
But that idea of the right one, this may be something you disagree with, and you might be right. I don't think there's just one person that fate has decided for each of us. Um, I think there are possibilities of people who could be compatible, but I believe God has given us choices, and even as we can choose a career or we can choose other things in life, we can choose to invest in this person or this person or this person. There's certainly people who aren't compatible.
Right.
But I think there may be more than one that we could be compatible with, because that's the only way I can understand. I had an uncle who had a wonderful marriage. His wife died of cancer after 15 years, and after another 10 or 11 years, he married someone else. They had a wonderful marriage. Did God choose two for him? How come? And I've got other friends who have no one, you know.
Yeah.
Is God unfair that way? Or is it choices, opportunities, timing? You know, sometimes you meet someone, it's just not the right time for the two of you. And so, yeah, there's a lot of factors that I think all come together. And then there's the part about you start investing. And, you know, do you want to throw away this investment? And what are the returns you're getting on this? If a relationship doesn't have more joy than problems, it's probably a sign it's not the right one, you know. Because every relationship is going to have some adjustments, some struggles, but overall, is it a good thing?
So you don't think that God specifically, what's the word? Picks?
Picks, yeah,
You don't
chooses.
think God?
I think sometimes he might.
Yeah.
Sometimes he might. But it's interesting that I think God is a God of choice. I mean, he has not chosen what career path you're going to take. But he's probably put some guardrails or some boundaries of ones not to take, you know. God is pretty interactive, I think. He likes to give us a lot of freedom of choice, but then guide us within that. And now, I'm very sure that I should be with my wife, you know what I mean? But I don't think that that was something that was predetermined, predestined. Because what if we had just met like 5 years earlier or later? Oops, missed it.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why I resist that idea of fate, you know, this is the person that fate has assigned to us, is because if we believe that and we commit to someone, and then after a while it's not going well, then the next thought is, this isn't the one. There's someone else out there.
Yeah.
That's really my soul person, you know, my partner, the one fate has chosen. Instead of saying, I made this choice, you know, I'm sticking with it. I'm going to make the best out of this. We can have good things here. So it's kind of abandoning our responsibility, I think, if we just blame fate or God or everyone else, you know.
That's good.
We have to make choices.
So you probably know this verse a lot better than I do. 1 Corinthians 13:8, the whole love, you know.
The love chapter.
Right. And part of it is saying that love never fails. How does that apply when you think about like marriages and divorces? Does that mean if it failed, it was never love?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a really good question. Looking at that chapter, there's some pretty good definitions about what love is, you know. Love is not boasting. Love is not looking for evil in the other person. Love is not rejoicing when evil prevails. Love is patient. Love is long-suffering. So we have all these characteristics about love. I guess we probably need to make a distinction between love and romance. Romantic feelings should be part of a good relationship, you know. It shouldn't be the dominant thing, you know, but romantic feelings should be there. You wouldn't want to have just blah, you know.
That's just a friend then.
Yeah. On the other hand, romantic feelings will come and go. And the studies show that, you know, 9 months to a year, people move through infatuation and they move into other kinds of things. And so the romantic feelings, you know, the goosebumps you get when you first see the person, or the excitement the first time they held your hand, those things may wear off some. But in a good marriage where there's real love, I think that's kind of like a cradle for romance to be born again and again and again. As you invest in each other, as you take time for each other and so forth, you know. Last night, we had gone to see some friends who I mentioned were in a care facility. And on the way back, I said to my wife, well, what should we do about supper? And she's like, I'd like to go to such and such a restaurant. Well, I kind of would just as much prefer to eat at home. But I knew she wanted to do that. So we need to do some things for the other person, you know.
Yeah.
And in the long run, we enjoyed it, you know. So you have to invest. You got to keep putting into it. It's like a bank account. If you're always making withdrawals, you know, you're in trouble. But was it never love in the first place? I think it may have been love that died. I
They stopped putting into
I
it.
think love can die. I don't think it fails to be love when it's alive. But I don't know, maybe that's twisting words, but I think love can die.
Yeah.
But if it's still alive, if it's genuine, it should keep going. You know, love never fails. If it has those characteristics of unself. The biggest issue is self. That's, you know, if someone said to me, what's been the biggest problem in your relationship? I'm not going to think of all the things where my wife isn't what I think she should be. It's like right here first.
Yeah.
It's myself, selfishness. And when we look at most conflicts, when we look at most disappointments, self is right in the middle of all that. So if love can help us be unselfish, you know. I think I may have mentioned in class there's a book called In Defense of Marriage. And the guy has a basic concept that I think is so important. He says, most of us going through life are takers. In relationships, we're takers. When we're growing up, we take from our parents, we take from our friends, and so forth. Marriage is the best relationship to learn to be givers. He says when you go deep in a relationship, you're learning to give. You're learning to be unselfish. You're learning to put the other person before you, you know. And so much of what is portrayed as love, as movies and music and all the rest, is what you can do for me.
Yeah.
And as long as you're doing for me, then that's great. But if you stop doing for me, then love died and I find someone else. But it's not really love that died. It's the feelings of romance and the feelings of the happiness I get when you make me feel good, rather than what am I giving to you? You know?
That's good. That's honestly a lot of people, when you talk about like it being like a bank account and just taking, a lot of people think that a good relationship or being a good partner is just by not cheating and just being faithful and loyal. But that's not, like you're saying, it's about like learning to give and about what you actually offer and what you do for the other person. It's not just about,
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep doing the things that brought you in love in the first place. Show an interest, take time, care for the other person, you know, find the things that they enjoy and so on, rather than what am I getting out of this?
Yeah.
You know.
Very true. When you talk about like, because I've heard this phrase a lot in relationships and marriage, is to keep God as the center of it. And I've always heard it, but I never really understood what it meant. Is it more than just, you know, praying together? What does it look like?
I think praying together is really important. I remember one time we were at a religious service and they said, you know, divide up into twos and threes and pray together. And it was my wife and I, and there's another woman who joined us, and we prayed together. And afterwards, she was crying and crying. And, you know, I said, you know, did we offend you? What did we say or whatever? She's like, I've been married for so many years. My husband never prays with me. We never pray together. And she said, I just realize how much I'm missing. So that's powerful and important. And by the way, prayer is very intimate. It draws people together, you know. So that's, And you know, it's also something else about prayer. If you're not getting along, if you've had a fight or whatever, it's really hard to say, okay, now, dear Father's in heaven, you know, and be all holy. So it means you got to work some things out, you know, so you can pray together. So that's really cool. But I think it has to come back, first of all, how do we keep God at the center? It's got to start with me. Am I keeping God at the center of my life? So I think it's very important for each individual to have their own faith walk, their own journey, their own time with God, their own, and then you have a shared time between you and God, and then it's between the two of you and God. So now it's a trio, you know. And that comes by worshiping together, doing spiritual religious activities together, worship together, praying together, being involved with good friends. You know, if you have good friends that you share spirituality with, you know, they're also involved in activities and so forth. That helps boost, you know.
Yeah.
I think another thing is forgiveness. I think forgiveness is one of the most awesome things that God offers into our relationships because it's not natural. Sooner or later, and usually sooner, it's going to be needed over and over again. You know. We hurt each other. We hurt the ones we love. We intentionally or unintentionally, we hurt. And if we have God at the center, I never have to think I've just run out of love. I just can't deal with that anymore because we can always go back to the source. And sometimes it's going to be, I don't feel very loving. I can't stand that person right now. Lord, soften my heart. Help me to forgive. Help me to realize where they're coming from. Help me to try to understand the pain they're feeling as to why they lashed out or they did this or that, you know. Not to be an abusive relationship, no. But forgiveness recognizes where there's an injustice, where something's been wrong. And probably it's good to say something about abusive relationships. In many cases, religion is used as a weapon or as a tool. And very religious people can be abusive. Very heathen or pagan people can be abusive. And in abusive relationships, we tend to manipulate people with things that they think are important, you know. And so, yeah, forgiveness doesn't say, well, keep on hurting me.
Yeah.
It says, I'm recognizing that you're hurting me. And there have to be some boundaries. You know, I'd never say stay in an abusive relationship. If you're in an abusive relationship, now it's only going to get worse. It doesn't change by itself. So if he or she are being destructive verbally, physically, sexually, get out while you can. And if you're in a marriage, then get the help. Whether they go or not, you go and get the help you need. And maybe it's separation for a while, it's something. That's forgiveness doesn't just gloss it over and say, oh, it's okay, it wasn't anything. No, it says, I've been hurt. You know, this hasn't been good. But I'm going to forgive you so we both can heal. Otherwise we just get bitter, you know.
That's good. I feel like a lot of the times forgiveness is often seen as like, oh, well, you're okay with me doing it, I'm just going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
But it's not.
It's being sorry enough to quit. You know. Yeah, a person may stumble again and it may happen, but it shouldn't be an intentional thing or a routine thing or something like that, you know. Forgiveness is such a gift and it provides so much more peace. In Arabic they have an expression about hatred or bitterness. It's like carrying fire in your belly. You're the one that gets burned as much as the other person. If I don't forgive someone, I mean, they're not going to lose sleep over it. But I might, you know.
I think along with the conception of keeping God as the center of relationships, I've also heard a lot about, relationships are so hard. And I would always say it's not hard if you have the right one. But now I see that it's never going to be easy no matter who the person is because you're combining two different brains, two different perspectives, two different, like, way of thinking. And so it's just a lot of the times it can be super overwhelming and hard to say, I want to be in a relationship, knowing that it's something that you have to put work into.
I would say it should be a good hard. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Um, I think most everything worthwhile in life takes some effort.
Mm.
You know, if you tell me one skill that you'd like to have, or something that you're good at, do you do music, for example? You play an instrument, you sing.
Sure.
Okay. If you said, I want to become a really good violinist, there's going to be some hard work.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a famous violinist one time, a lady came up to him after a concert and said, I'd give my life to play like that. And he says, I have. You see, everything worthwhile in life takes effort, takes discipline, takes investing time.
Yeah.
Same with a relationship. It shouldn't be dreary hard work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's going to take some effort. It's going to take, but the rewards are going to be there along the way, you know.
Yeah.
So I'd call it good hard. Maybe that doesn't make sense in English, but that's how I think of it, you know.
No, that's good.
Because yes, we shouldn't be naive and just think everything fits natural. Because like you said, we got thousands of different personality and habits and all kinds of stuff. Not everything's gonna gel properly. Our backgrounds can make such a difference.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, adjusting and going through this can really be a good thing.
That's good.
It's actually fun to learn to appreciate differences, fun to learn to rejoice in the fact that we're not the same. I'm so glad my wife is not the same as I am. It would be really boring.
Very true,
She might
actually,
like
yeah.
us to be a little bit more the same sometimes, but you do want to have common things that are shared, but the other person enriches your life.
Yeah. I feel like there's a lot that was said to help keep relationships healthy and to know when it's not and how to fix it, I think. So this is good, just to define why relationships are even important and, you know, what to look for and how to keep, you know, boundaries and, yeah.
And it's a learning process.
For sure.
You know, after 50 years, I'm starting to understand a little. So in this journey of relationships, don't pay attention to people who think they're experts. I mean, listen to what they have to say, but nobody's an expert.
Yeah.
We're all learning. Maybe somebody has a few more scars, or they've got a few more muscles that they've exercised, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a journey. It's a process.
That's good. Well, thank you. Thank you for your insight and you taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
Keep watching and listening because she's got lots to offer.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you guys
Imagined.
next time.